Hi, welcome to another video. So, OpenAI has been shipping a lot of Codex updates recently, and in this video I want to do a proper catch-up. In the last Codex video, I talked about the big Codex Desktop app refresh, where OpenAI made the app feel less like just a wrapper around the CLI and more like an actual workspace for getting things done. So before we talk about the new CLI updates, let's quickly recap that, because it matters for understanding where Codex is going. The big update was that the Codex app got an in-app browser, so you could open local websites or public pages, leave feedback on the rendered page, and ask Codex to fix that feedback. This is actually pretty important because a lot of AI coding tools can edit files, but they don't always verify what the app actually looks like. They also added computer use on macOS, so Codex can see, click, and type inside native apps. That means it can help with GUI-only bugs, app settings, simulator flows, and other stuff where there isn't just a clean terminal command. Then they added chats, which are threads that don't need a project folder first, so you can use Codex for research, writing, planning, analysis, or collecting sources without forcing everything into a codebase. They also added thread automations, so a thread can wake itself up on a schedule and continue from the same context. The app also got a task sidebar, context-aware suggestions, better pull request workflows, an artifact viewer for PDFs, documents, spreadsheets, and presentations, memory support. In some places, multiple terminals, multi-window support, Intel Mac support, Windows System Tray support, appearance settings, and plugins. And there's also something called Codex Pets now, which is kind of funny, but also weirdly useful. Basically, Codex Pets are optional animated companions inside the Codex app. You can enable them from settings, choose a built-in pet, or refresh custom pets from your local Codex home. You can also type /pet in the composer, use wake pet or tuck away pet in settings, or use the command menu to toggle the floating overlay. Now at first this sounds like just a cute little gimmick, and to be fair, it kind of is. But the useful part is that the floating overlay keeps your active Codex work visible while you're using other apps. It shows the active thread, tells you whether Codex is running, waiting for input, or ready for review, and gives you a short progress prompt, so you can glance at what's happening without reopening the full thread. So if you're the kind of person who leaves Codex running in the background while you're doing something else, this is actually a pretty nice quality of life feature. It is playful, but it also solves a real problem, knowing whether the agent is still working or whether it needs you to come back and approve something. You can even create your own custom pet with the Hatch Pet skill. You install the Hatch Pet skill, reload skills from the command menu, and then ask it to create a new pet inspired by your recent projects. So yeah, Codex is getting serious enterprise permission controls and also little animated pets at the same time, which is very OpenAI in a weird way. So that was the big picture. Codex Desktop is not just terminal Codex with buttons anymore. It is slowly turning into this broader AI workbench where you can code, review, test, browse, manage PRs, and even handle non-code artifacts. Now let's come to the newer updates, and the major one here starts with Codex CLI version 0.122 as 0. This update is interesting because it is not one flashy feature. It is more like a lot of foundational stuff that makes Codex feel more reliable, more controllable, and more ready for serious workflows. First, standalone installs are now more self-contained. Also, the Codex app command now opens or installs the desktop app correctly on Windows and Intel Macs. This sounds small, but it matters because if someone is just trying Codex for the first time and the install flow breaks, they don't care how good the model is. The whole thing feels bad. Then the TUI now supports side conversations with the /side command. This means you can ask a quick side question without fully derailing the main work. I like this a lot because it is a very real workflow. Sometimes the agent is working on a refactor, and you just want to ask, wait, what does this file do, or is this dependency still needed, without messing up the main thread. Queued input also got better. You can now queue /commands and ! shell prompts while Codex is still working. Again, this is one of those things that sounds boring in a changelog, but in real use, it makes the tool feel less rigid. You don't have to wait for the agent to stop breathing before giving it the next instruction. Plan mode also got a pretty nice upgrade. It can now start implementation in a fresh context, and it shows you context usage before you decide whether to carry the planning thread forward. This is a good idea because planning conversations can get messy. If you spend a long time planning, you might fill the context with discussion, alternatives, and outdated ideas. Starting implementation with a clean context can make the actual coding part more focused. So this is quite great to see. Plugins also got a lot better in 0.122. There is now tabbed browsing, inline enable and disable toggles, marketplace removal, and support for remote cross-repo or local marketplace sources. Basically, plugins are becoming a proper ecosystem inside Codex. This is one of the most important directions for Codex, in my opinion, because skills and MCPs are useful, but packaging them properly is what makes them reusable for teams and normal users. If plugins become easy enough, then Codex can become way more customizable than most closed AI coding tools. They also tightened permissions and sandboxing. File system permissions now support deny read glob policies, managed deny read requirements, platform sandbox enforcement, and isolated Codex exec runs that ignore user, config, or rules. That is not the kind of update that gets a thumbnail, but it is important. If you are using Codex in a real company, or even just in a repo with private keys, environment files, client code, or sensitive docs, you want better controls around what the agent can read and write. This is the part where Codex has to grow up from cool coding assistant into something teams can actually trust. Another big thing from 0.122 as arrays is that tool discovery and image generation are now enabled by default. They also improved high-detail image handling and metadata for image outputs from MCP and the JavaScript REPL. So if you are building or debugging UI, this helps because Codex can work with more visual context. And this also connects nicely with the app's browser and artifact viewer direction. OpenAI is clearly trying to make Codex handle more than plain text and diffs. There were also a bunch of fixes. Stale approvals now disappear when another client resolves them. Resumed and forked app server threads replay token usage immediately, so the status UI has the right context. Logout revokes managed ChatGPT tokens. Project hooks and exec policies require trusted workspaces. Sandboxed apply patch rights work better. File watchers notice new files after watching begins. And there are a bunch of TUI polish fixes around the model menu, skills list, duplicate context status, and terminal titles. So version 0.122 everywhere is basically a cleanup and platform update. More reliable installs, better side conversations, better planning, better plugin workflows, better permissions, better image and tool support. But OpenAI didn't stop there. After that, Codex CLI 0.123 added a built-in Amazon Bedrock model provider with AWS profile support. This is pretty cool because it means Codex is not only tied to OpenAI models or generic OpenAI compatible endpoints. If you are in an AWS-heavy company, Bedrock support is a big deal. It also added /MCP verbose, which gives full MCP server diagnostics, resources, and resource templates. This is really useful because MCP setups can be annoying to debug. Sometimes the tool doesn't appear, sometimes the server starts but resources don't load, and sometimes the config shape is slightly wrong. Having a verbose MCP view is exactly the kind of thing power users need. They also improved plugin MCP loading so it accepts more .mcp.json shapes, improved real-time handoffs for background agents, added remote sandbox config requirements, refreshed model metadata for GPT 5.4, and fixed things like copy after rollback, stuck working states, Unicode input in VS Code WSL terminals, and Codex exec inheriting shared flags. Then version 0.124.0 added quick reasoning controls in the terminal UI. Alt, lowers reasoning, and Alt period raises reasoning. This is actually a nice power user feature because sometimes you don't want to open a menu or change config just to make the current task lighter or heavier. They also added multi-environment support for app server sessions, so a session can manage multiple environments and choose the working directory per turn. That is useful for multi-workspace setups, remote setups, and basically any workflow where one repo or one folder is not enough. This version also added first-class Amazon Bedrock support for OpenAI-compatible providers, including AWS SIG-v4 signing and AWS Credential Auth. Remote plugin marketplaces can now be listed and read directly. Hooks became stable and can observe MCP tools, apply patch, and long-running bash sessions. And one small but important cost-related thing. Eligible ChatGPT plans now default to the fast service tier unless you opt out. So there is no new separate pricing thing in this changelog, but the value keeps improving if you already pay for ChatGPT and use Codex heavily. Then we got the GPT 5.5 and Codex app update. GPT 5.5 is now available in Codex as the recommended model for most tasks when it appears in your model picker. OpenAI says it is useful for implementation, refactors, debugging, testing, validation, and knowledge work artifacts. So basically, the default recommendation is now GPT 5.5 for serious work. If you don't see it, you need to update the CLI, IDE extension, or app. And during rollout, GPT 5.4 is still the fallback. The Codex app also got browser use, which means Codex can actually operate the in-app browser for local dev servers and file-backed pages. So instead of only opening a preview and letting you comment on it, Codex can use the browser when it needs to click through a rendered UI, reproduce a visual bug, or verify a local fix. This is a really important step. A coding agent that cannot look at the UI is always limited. It can change CSS, but it can't always know if the result is actually good. Browser control helps close that loop. They also added automatic approval reviews. Codex can route eligible approval prompts through an automatic reviewer agent before the request runs. The app shows the review status and risk level, so you can see whether the reviewer approved, denied, stopped, or timed out. I think this is one of those features that sounds weird at first, because it is basically an AI reviewing another AI before it does something. But for dangerous commands, file access, or risky operations, it makes sense. It gives you another layer between the agent wants to do this and it just happened. And then version 0.125.0 came out as the newest CLI release in this batch. This one adds a lot of app server plumbing. Unix socket transport, better resume and fork pagination, sticky environments, and remote thread config and store support. In normal language, this means Codex is getting better at long-running sessions, remote workflows, and app integrations. Plugin management also improved again. App server plugin management can now install remote plugins and upgrade configured marketplaces. So, plugins are clearly not a side quest anymore. OpenAI is investing in them pretty seriously. Permission profiles now round-trip across TUI sessions, user turns, MCP sandbox, state, shell escalation, and app server APIs. That sounds super technical, but the simple meaning is this. Codex is trying to keep permission state consistent across the different places where Codex can run. CLI, app, MCP, shell approval, app server, all of it should agree on what is allowed. Model providers now own model discovery, and AWS or Bedrock account state is exposed to app clients. No, the fixes in 0.125.0 are also pretty important. Interrupting/review and exiting the TUI should no longer leave the interface stuck. Exec server should not drop buffered output after a process exits. App server now respects explicitly untrusted project config instead of auto-persisting. Overall, this batch of updates makes Codex feel like it is moving very quickly. The earlier desktop refresh was about turning Codex into a real app. The newer updates are about making the whole stack stronger. CLI, desktop, plugins, MCP, permissions, browser verification, Bedrock, hooks, and automation. To be honest, I still think the Codex app has to prove itself in daily use. In the previous video, I mentioned that it had some rough UI choices and some weird quirks, and I still don't think OpenAI gets a free pass just because the model is good, but the direction is really interesting. Codex is not just trying to be another Claude Code clone. It is trying to be a full coding workspace with browser testing, computer use, plugins, automations, PR review, artifacts, remote environments, and multiple interfaces all connected together. If you are already paying for ChatGPT, this is becoming a better and better value. And if you're on a team, the permissions, plugin marketplace, hooks, Bedrock support, and app server improvements are probably the more important updates than the flashy model picker stuff. So yeah, overall it's pretty cool. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you liked this video, consider donating through the Super Thanks option or becoming a member by clicking the Join button. Also, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, bye.